For over a century, the name Boeing has been synonymous with aviation. Their aircraft have connected the world, shrinking vast oceans and continents into mere hours of travel. It's a legacy built on innovation, ambition, and the promise of safety. But alongside this story of triumph, there is a darker, more turbulent history. A history marked by tragedy, mechanical failure, and devastating human loss. From the earliest days of jet travel to the most advanced airliners in the sky today, Boeing's fleet has been at the center of some of aviation's most haunting disasters. These aren't just statistics or headlines. They are stories of lives cut short, families torn apart, and questions that linger for decades. Tonight, we're going to look beyond the corporate press releases and the technical jargon. We'll delve into the history of Boeing's most significant crashes, examining the chain of events, the human element, and the critical design flaws that led to catastrophe. We'll explore the moments that shook the industry to its core and forced a reckoning with the fundamental principles of air safety. This is a journey through troubled skies, a chronicle of incidents that have shaped modern aviation, for better and for worse. We'll begin with a recent hypothetical tragedy that shook the world and once again put the spotlight on one of Boeing's flagship models. We'll then journey back in time, revisiting the 737 MAX crisis, the deadliest accidents in history, and the enduring mysteries that still baffle investigators. Our goal is not just to recount these events, but to understand them, to connect the dots and ask the tough questions about accountability, oversight, and the true cost of progress. The Boeing 787 Dreamliner was marketed as the future of air travel, a marvel of composite materials, fuel efficiency, and passenger comfort. For years, it flew with a remarkable safety record, a bright spot in Boeing's often turbulent public image. But in the early hours of a clear morning in 2025, that perception was shattered just moments after takeoff from Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel International Airport in Ahmedabad. Air India Flight 182, a state-of-the-art 787-8, was climbing through the sky, bound for London with 214 souls on board. Everything seemed normal. The communication with air traffic control was routine. The weather was perfect. But then, silence. On the ground, witnesses reported hearing a series of loud, unusual noises from the ascending aircraft, followed by a horrifying sight. The plane appeared to break apart in the sky. Debris rained down over a wide area of farmland and villages outside the city. First responders arriving at the scene were met with a scene of utter devastation. There were no survivors. The crash of Flight 182 became the first fatal accident involving the Dreamliner, a nightmare scenario for both Air India and Boeing. The world watched in shock, and an immediate, pressing question emerged. What could cause one of the world's most advanced jets to disintegrate in midair? The investigation immediately focused on potential structural failure. The black boxes, recovered from the wreckage, were sent for analysis under intense international scrutiny. Early reports pointed to a possible catastrophic failure originating in the composite fuselage, the very material that made the Dreamliner so revolutionary. Investigators painstakingly pieced together fragments, searching for clues in the fracture patterns and stress marks. The tragedy in Ahmedabad wasn't just another crash. It was a direct challenge to the very technology Boeing had staked its future on, raising terrifying new questions about the long-term durability of modern aircraft. Before the Dreamliner's hypothetical failure, a very real crisis had already engulfed Boeing, centered on its best-selling aircraft, the 737 MAX. The first domino fell on October 29, 2018. Lion Air Flight 610 took off from Jakarta, Indonesia, and just 13 minutes later, it plunged into the Java Sea. All 189 people on board were killed. Pilots had battled the plane's automated systems, which repeatedly pushed the nose down, but they didn't know why. They were fighting a ghost in the machine, a piece of software they hadn't even been told existed. It was called MCAS, the Maneuvering Characteristics Augmentation System. Boeing and the FAA initially suggested the crash might be a one-off event, possibly related to maintenance or pilot error specific to that airline. They issued directives, but the 737 MAX fleet, a cornerstone of airlines worldwide, kept flying. Then, less than 5 months later, on March 10, 2019, the nightmare repeated itself. Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302 crashed just 6 minutes after taking off from Addis Ababa, killing all 157 people on board. The flight data was eerily similar to the Lion Air disaster. The pilots were again fighting an uncommanded, relentless dive, triggered by a single faulty sensor. This second crash was the tipping point. It was undeniable proof of a systemic failure. The world's aviation authorities acted swiftly, and one by one, countries grounded the entire global fleet of the 737 MAX. The ensuing investigation exposed a shocking story of corporate pressure, flawed design, and regulatory capture. It revealed that Boeing, in its rush to compete with Airbus, had implemented the powerful MCS system covertly, failing to inform pilots or require adequate training. The deaths of 346 people were not just a tragedy. They were the direct result of a catastrophic failure of oversight and ethics that would tarnish Boeing's reputation for years to come. Long before software was the primary concern, the deadliest accident in aviation history occurred not in the air, but on the ground, shrouded in a thick blanket of fog. The date was March 27, 1977, at Los Rodeos Airport on the Canary Island of Tenerife. The airport was unusually congested, forced to handle traffic diverted from a nearby airport due to a bomb threat. Two colossal Boeing 747s, the giants of the sky, were among the planes waiting. One was Pan Am Flight 1736, arriving from Los Angeles. The other was KLM Flight 4805, a charter from Amsterdam. Both were preparing for the final leg of their journeys. The fog was getting thicker, drastically reducing visibility. Amid a series of confusing and misunderstood communications with the control tower, the captain of the KLM 747, a senior training captain for the airline, made a fateful decision. Believing he had clearance, he began his takeoff roll. At the same time, the Pan Am 747 was still taxiing on the very same runway, trying to find its designated exit in the dense fog. The Pan Am crew saw the KLM's landing lights approaching at high speed through the mist, but it was too late. The co-pilot's last recorded words were a panicked, "God damn, that son of a bitch is coming." The KLM jet, its nose already lifted for takeoff, slammed into the top of the Pan Am plane, ripping it apart and creating a massive fireball. The KLM aircraft stalled, crashed further down the runway, and exploded, killing all 248 people on board. On the Pan Am jet, a handful of people, including the pilots, managed to escape the burning wreckage, but 335 of its occupants perished. The total death toll was 583. The investigation revealed a tragic combination of factors: severe weather, radio interference, and crucially, human error rooted in miscommunication and impatience. The Tenerife disaster became a defining case study in crew resource management and standardized aviation phraseology, forcing the industry to fundamentally rethink how pilots and controllers talk to each other. On August 12, 1985, Japan Airlines Flight 123, a Boeing 747, departed from Tokyo's Haneda Airport on a short domestic flight to Osaka. It was the peak of the Obon holiday season, and the jumbo jet was packed with 524 people. Just 12 minutes into the flight, as the plane climbed to its cruising altitude, a loud explosive sound rocked the cabin. The aircraft had suffered a catastrophic structural failure. The rear pressure bulkhead, a critical component that separates the pressurized cabin from the unpressurized tail, had ruptured. The explosive decompression blew off the vertical stabilizer and severed all four of the plane's hydraulic lines. The pilots were now flying a crippled giant. With no hydraulic pressure, they had lost all control of the rudder, elevators, and ailerons, the essential control surfaces needed to steer the aircraft. For the next 32 minutes, the crew fought with incredible skill and courage to keep the plane in the air, using only the differential thrust of the engines to make slow, lumbering turns. They were battling a phenomenon known as a phugoid cycle, with the plane pitching violently up and down, making it nearly impossible to maintain a steady course. On the ground, air traffic controllers could only listen helplessly as the crew reported the aircraft was uncontrollable. Despite their heroic efforts, the battle was unwinnable. The 747 eventually clipped a mountain ridge and crashed into the dense, remote terrain of Mount Takamagahara. Due to the remote location and initial confusion about the crash site, rescue operations were delayed, a factor that some believe cost lives. In the end, miraculously, 4 people survived, but 520 did not. It remains the deadliest single aircraft accident in history. The investigation later traced the cause back to a faulty repair performed by Boeing technicians 7 years earlier on the rear pressure bulkhead. A small, improper fix had created a weakness that, over thousands of flight cycles, grew into a catastrophic point of failure. The sky above India is vast, but on the evening of November 12, 1996, it wasn't big enough. High above the village of Charki Dadri, west of New Delhi, two large aircraft were on a collision course. One was Saudi Flight 763, a Boeing 747 that had just departed from Delhi, climbing on its way to Dhahran, Saudi Arabia, with 312 people on board. The other was Kazakhstan Airlines Flight 1907, an Ilyushin Il-76 cargo plane, descending for its approach into the same Delhi airport, carrying 37 people. They were operating in the same airspace under the guidance of a single air traffic controller. The Kazakhstani crew, who reportedly had a limited command of English, were cleared to descend to 15,000 feet. The Saudi 747 was cleared to climb to 14,000 feet, maintaining 1,000 feet of vertical separation, a standard safety margin. But for reasons that remain debated, the Kazakhstani aircraft continued its descent, passing through its assigned altitude. The Delhi air traffic controller, working with radar technology that did not provide altitude information for secondary targets, had no way of seeing the impending disaster. The pilots had no onboard collision avoidance systems to warn them of the other plane's proximity. At 14,000 feet, the tail of the Ilyushin sliced through the left wing of the Boeing 747. The 747 immediately entered a rapid, spiraling descent, breaking apart before it hit the ground. The crippled Kazakhstani plane also went down. The collision was catastrophic, leaving no survivors. All 349 people on both aircraft were killed, making it the world's deadliest mid-air collision. The disaster exposed critical deficiencies in India's air traffic control infrastructure and highlighted the dangers of language barriers in international aviation. In its wake, Indian aviation authorities mandated the use of traffic collision avoidance systems, or TCS, for all aircraft flying in and out of the country, a change that made the skies safer but came at a terrible cost. Of all the tragedies involving Boeing aircraft, none is more haunting or mysterious than the disappearance of Malaysia Airlines Flight 370. On March 8, 2014, a modern Boeing 777, an aircraft with one of the best safety records in aviation, took off from Kuala Lumpur, bound for Beijing. On board were 239 passengers and crew. About 40 minutes into the flight, as it passed from Malaysian to Vietnamese airspace over the South China Sea, the plane's transponder, which communicates with air traffic control, was switched off. The last verbal communication from the cockpit was a calm, "Good night, Malaysian 370. Shortly after that final message, the plane vanished from civilian radar screens. But military radar and satellite data later revealed a ghost flight. Instead of continuing to Beijing, the aircraft made a sharp turn west, flying back across the Malay Peninsula, and then turned south, out over the vast empty expanse of the southern Indian Ocean. It continued to fly for hours, far beyond its intended route, sending automated pings to a satellite until, presumably, it ran out of fuel. The world launched into the largest and most expensive search in aviation history, scouring millions of square kilometers of ocean, but the main wreckage was never found. What happened in the cockpit of MH370 remains unknown. Theories range from a deliberate act of mass murder-suicide by one of the pilots to a catastrophic emergency like a fire that incapacitated the crew, leaving the plane to fly on autopilot. Small pieces of debris confirmed to be from the 777 have washed ashore on the coasts of Africa and islands in the Indian Ocean, proving the plane did go down in the water. But without the black boxes, the cockpit voice recorder and flight data recorder, the final moments of flight MH370 and the reasons for its bizarre deviation are locked in a watery grave. For the families of the 239 people on board, the lack of answers is an unending torment, a mystery that has left a permanent scar on modern aviation. The stories we've covered tonight, from the tangled wreckage in Tenerife to the silent phantom flight of MH370, are more than just a history of Boeing's darkest days. They represent a continuing narrative of challenge and a consequence in the aviation industry. Today, Boeing finds itself under a level of scrutiny it hasn't faced in decades. The 737 MAX disasters were not an endpoint, but a catalyst for intense investigations by the FAA and other global aviation authorities. Whistleblowers have come forward with alarming claims about production standards and quality control, not just for the 737, but for other flagship models like the 787 Dreamliner. These ongoing concerns have created a crisis of confidence. Every new incident, whether it's a panel blowing off mid-flight or a manufacturing flaw discovered on the assembly line, is now viewed through the lens of past tragedies. The company that once defined American engineering prowess is now fighting to restore its reputation for safety and reliability. The central question for regulators, airlines, and the flying public is whether the lessons from the past have truly been learned, or if a corporate culture prioritizing speed and profit over safety still persists. The future of Boeing, and indeed the safety of our skies, depends on the answer. It requires unwavering transparency, robust and independent oversight, and a fundamental commitment to putting safety above all else. The 1,937 lives lost in the crashes we've discussed, and the countless others affected, serve as a permanent, solemn reminder of the stakes. Their memory demands nothing less than a constant, vigilant effort to ensure that such tragedies are never repeated. Thank you for watching.